She didn't take it in the dark. She didn't sneak via a back hallway or put it in her purse without anyone seeing it. She wore it in front of 200 people. A royal pendant that hadn't been seen in public since Queen Elizabeth's time. And when the royal guards spotted it hanging from her neck, he didn't think twice. He broke formation and stepped forward. What he did next not only got Queen Camilla out of Windsor Castle, it also changed the rules for how royal families pass along their wealth. Before we tell you exactly what happened that day, please make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. Also, please leave a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. This wasn't only a steal, it was also an insult to the memory of the late Queen. The sun was setting in the late afternoon, and it was doing that thing it does at Windsor. It was slanting through the old oaks and making shadows that made you forget what century you were in. There shouldn't have been any tourists there that day. There shouldn't have been any press corps sleeping outside the gates. Just a small group of Canadian diplomats enjoying the royal treatment, with real tea service and all the pomp you'd expect from a castle that has been doing this for almost 1,000 years. Warrant Officer Elias Trenum was very familiar with these calm days. He had been in the Coldstream Guards for about 60 years, which is longer than most people spend in any job. He had become a part of the furniture at Windsor. Not literally, of course, but some tourists did treat him like he was one of the crown jewels, taking pictures of him like he was. There was something about Elias that made you want to look again. It may have been the way he acted, or it could have been his pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. That afternoon, he stood just inside the south entryway, behind stone arches that had seen kings and queens come and go long before America was even a thought. Olivia Marin, the senior collections archivist, was leading the Canadian delegation through the tapestry corridor. She knew every painting, every piece of china, and every secret these walls housed. Everything was going according to plan, until 3 Range Rovers drove into the inner courtyard without any of the normal ceremony. No flags, no warning ahead of time. This is the kind of entrance that makes palace personnel nervous because it suggests someone important is making things up as they go along. In royal circles, an improv typically signifies trouble. Queen Camilla got out of the second car like she owned the plate, which she did now, but the way she stood up straight and didn't look at anyone, as well as the crisp click of her heels on the gravel, made it clear that this wasn't a social call. She had the look of someone on a mission, the kind that doesn't leave room for small conversation or niceties. "Your Majesty," Elias said, stepping forward with the kind of respectful precision that comes with knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet for 40 years. "I wasn't told about any scheduled visits today. Can I check to see if you have permission to enter the South Vault corridor?" She didn't even stop. "I don't need to ask permission to visit my family's estate. The Windsor vaults aren't public property. They are family property. I have full access." At that time, most individuals would have stood aside. She was the queen consort, after all, and royal rank is as hard as rock. But Elias had been around long enough to know the difference between power and guesswork. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm as stone. "Queen Elizabeth's will gave some of her possessions to the Royal Collection Trust. To get to the sealed compartments you need." I said, "It's family property." Her voice pierced through the hallway like ice. "Not yours to keep safe." Elias stayed still. Not a bit. And that's when the air changed, like the tension you feel moments before a storm bursts. She turned to her aide with the nonchalant malice of someone who is used to having their way, and said, "You can tell your commanding officer that he's been reassigned pending review. Escort him out." The aide looked like he would rather be anywhere else on Earth. The Canadian diplomats, bless them, suddenly became quite interested in the way the ceiling was built. Olivia, too, had gone pale, holding her clipboard as if it would keep her grounded in reality. But Elias Trenum had fought IRA bombs in Belfast and ethnic cleansers in Bosnia. He wasn't going to leave his job because of a royal temper tantrum. He nodded once on purpose, not in agreement, but to show he understood, and then returned to his place. When Queen Camilla walked down the southern hallway toward vaults that Queen Elizabeth had personally locked, something old and quiet woke up in the walls of Windsor Castle. Not ceremony, not protocol. Something that had been asleep for 4 years, waiting for this very time. Elias Trenum was never supposed to be important. He had been the person in the background for 37 years, standing guard while more important people made more significant choices. He had been to places that newspapers couldn't spell, and had to keep an eye on discussions that never officially happened. The best soldier for a world that isn't ideal. But Queen Elizabeth saw something different in him. Maybe it was how he could stand outside her private study for hours without moving, or how he never told her what he heard. Whatever it was, she had drawn him aside one spring evening in 2019, just a few weeks before her last trip to Balmoral. You would think she would sit behind her big wood desk, but she didn't. Instead, she stood by the window with a cup of Earl Grey getting cold on the sill and watched her corgis run over the yard like they had all the time in the world, which, as it turned out, they didn't. "Warrant Officer Trenum," she said in her cautious way, making sure every word counted and nothing was wasted. "You know that legacy isn't made up of things, right?" "Yes, Mom." He had learnt a long time ago that the Queen's questions were not really questions. It's made of self-control, knowing when to give something away, and when to keep it until the right time. She walked slowly and carefully, as she had learned to do as she became older. She crossed to a drawer in her writing desk that was probably worth more than most people's cars. She took a brass key off of a fading ribbon from it. There were no marks, no official stamps, and nothing that would show up in any registry. Next to it was a cream envelope with wax on it that had seen better days. "This doesn't go through official channels," she replied as she put both things in his gloved hands. "This key isn't in any logbook, and neither will anyone else." The key seemed heavier than it appeared, like it was made of more than just brass and responsibility. She went on, her voice lowering to a whisper. "The legacy rooms in Windsor have pieces that belong to the crown. Yes, but more importantly, they belong to time. No one can get to them without my voice or yours." She didn't say what that meant. There was no need for her to. Elias had stood in her shadow for long enough to know that some orders were meant to last long after the person who delivered them had stopped talking. "Understood, Your Majesty." For a minute, her eyes stayed on his face. She wasn't looking at a soldier. She was looking at a man she was giving something valuable to. "I trust you, Warrant Officer, even when I'm not here to say it." That was the last time she ever talked to him alone. He had kept the key in the inside lining of his service coat through every inspection, ceremony, and silent night when he wondered whether he had made up the whole thing. But he didn't think of anything. 4 years later, when Queen Camilla asked for access to the very location he had been told to protect, Elias knew exactly why Elizabeth had picked him for this job. Some secrets don't want to stay hidden. They simply need the proper person to find them. The next morning, there was a silence that made the palace personnel who had been there for a long time concerned. It's not the peaceful calm of a well-run home. It's the tense silence that comes after something goes wrong and no one wants to be the first to speak it out loud. Elias saw it right away when he got to work in the morning. Too many conversations that halted when he walked by and too many meaningful looks between people who typically didn't even look at each other. Olivia Marin was the one who finally said what everyone was thinking. She caught him by surprise near the greenhouse entrance, looking like she hadn't slept much. "Did you hear?" she questioned in a voice that was just above a whisper. "Her Majesty went into the South Vault last night." Elias kept his face blank, but something chilly was spreading in his chest. Olivia kept looking around as if she expected someone to come out of the shadows and say, "Don't worry about it, it's a family matter." "But the entry logs," she said, shaking her head. "They don't make sense." That caught his eye. Using Windsor Vault access was not the same as using your ATM card. It needed biometric validation and an archival code, and every entry was automatically logged. The system was more paranoid than a nuclear power plant. "Not a note of access?" he inquired. "None. It's like the system didn't even notice the door opening. But I know she was there because—" Olivia stopped and looked sad. "Because things are missing." The trek to the security booth seemed to take longer than usual. The boy who was on duty at night looked like he should have still been asking his mom for lunch money. He became red as a tomato when Elias asked for the access logs. There it was, shining on the screen like a charge. Door number 17A, Legacy Vault Corridor, timestamp 2246. There should have been identification validation, signature verification, and clearance authorization. But there was nothing, just a ghost entry that shouldn't exist in a system that was made to never forget. "Sir, should I file a report?" the young officer inquired, his voice breaking a little. Elias looked at the screen for a long time. Finally he responded, "No, not yet," because now it wasn't simply about getting in without permission. Someone had gone to the trouble of hiding their footprints, which suggested they knew exactly what they were doing. If Queen Camilla was willing to break royal security rules to get to whatever was in that vault, then it was worth more than its weight in gold. The question was, who was it worth it to? Elias ended up in the royal archives by late afternoon. This climate-controlled fortress was hidden beneath the northeast wing. Olivia Marin kept detailed records of everything the monarchy owned, had owned, or might hold in the future. She was waiting for him with a clipboard, and the kind of look on her face that people have when they're about to tell someone really bad news. "I checked everything 3 times before I called you," she remarked as she led him through closed doors that opened with hefty clicks that made it clear they were serious. "And yes, something is definitely missing. If a library and a bank vault had a baby, it would look like the legacy inventory chamber. Everything was organized, linked together, and had enough protection to make Fort Knox green with envy." Olivia pointed to a laminated sheet of paper that was mounted behind reinforced glass. It was a master list of things that Queen Elizabeth had personally chosen for what the royal bureaucracy politely called indefinite review. She read, "Item 037B," and tapped the glass with her pen. The Snowdon tiara. The last time it was seen outside the vault was in 1974 for an official photograph. Queen Elizabeth asked that it be preserved from public view until the nation asks for it. She turned the page. Item 041F, the Lockidge Pendant, was added to the protected list in 2005 under Inheritance Clause 16.1. The Queen last touched it in 2012, and then locked it away for what she called cultural review, whatever that means. Then Olivia got to the part that made her voice sink to a whisper. Item 072K, a leather-bound journal. The spine doesn't have a date on it. The Queen's note says to keep it unread until the nation asks. Elias looked at the 3 empty holes in the vault wall. They were velvet-lined compartments that should have held treasures but instead held shadows. These weren't just precious things. They were time capsules that were hidden away for reasons that Elizabeth probably never told anyone. Olivia remarked that the pendant alone could cause problems in Parliament if it showed up at a state banquet. She sounded worried. But if that journal is gone, we're not following the rules anymore. We're talking about secrets. Elias felt something change inside him. It wasn't rage, but something colder and more menacing. This isn't a mistake. It's stealing. You don't think she would really? Yes. He cut her off, his voice as cold as stone. I do. He turned to the door, and his decision became clear. Get your records ready. Write down everything, but keep it offline for now. Why? He said. We're not filing a loss report. And then he walked away. We're putting together a case. Elias did something the next morning that went against all he had learned in 40 years of military service. He didn't follow the chain of command at all, not because he was angry or rebellious, but because he knew exactly what would happen if he did. There would be secret meetings, carefully worded memos, and in the end, nothing. Nothing that allows powerful people stay powerful, while the truth is buried behind a pile of diplomatic verbiage. Instead, he ended up in the basement of the archive, using a printer that probably hadn't been used since the Clinton administration to make an envelope that would change everything. Inside were records of the lost things, access logs with timestamps, Olivia's sworn statement, and a handwritten message in his own precise handwriting. In accordance with Standing Order 17 of the Royal Integrity Statute, I am sending this as formal notice of a breach of Sovereign Legacy Protocol. Warrant Officer Elias Trenum, Coldstream Guards, Windsor Post No. 22. The envelope was addressed to Mr. C. Havers, Royal Integrity Liaison for the Royal Collection Trust. Most palace workers had never heard that name stated out loud before. The rail was not military, diplomatic, or press-facing. It was in the shadows of the royal administration. They were the ones who kept the uncomfortable truths alive in a world that liked comfortable lies. A diplomatic courier took the envelope without asking any questions and promised to deliver it only if it was signed. The answer came in 2 hours. Not with a lot of fuss, but slid under his door like a secret document. We are now aware. Stand by for coordination. 4 words that meant everything was about to change. That afternoon, one of Camilla's senior aides showed up at Elias's job, wearing costly wool that looked like a terrible sign. The man's face seemed squeezed, like someone who was giving someone an ultimatum they didn't want to. Warrant Officer Trenum, he continued without further ado. You've caused confusion in the household office. The Queen Consort would like to know why her presence in the legacy corridor has led to questions. Elias remained looking straight ahead. I filed duty logs as required by protocol. I don't have to explain anything else. The aide's jaw got stiff. We've also heard that you went around internal reporting and contacted external registry custodians. That's too far. Not if the items taken away were marked as non-transferable under clause, Elias said calmly. The threat came next, spoken in a nonchalant, harsh way, by someone who was used to making issues go away. You'll be relieved if you need to be. Elias gave a tiny nod. That is the prerogative of the royal household. He didn't dispute, defend himself, or apologize though. Sometimes, the best thing you can do to power is not be afraid of it. There was 3 days of guarded stillness after that. No news stories, no press releases, and no big changes in tasks. But inside Clarence House, the air was thick with the kind of tension that comes before storms. The Cedar Room, 1900. Discretion expected. The invitation came on ivory paper, with exquisite handwriting. There was no signature or official seal, just coordinates and a time that felt more like a countdown. Elias came in full dress uniform, with red Coldstream buttons polished to a mirror shine. He left his sword at the door because some meetings need surrender before they start. The Cedar Room wasn't used very frequently because it was too private for state business and too fancy for casual chat. But tonight it was turned into something like a courthouse and a confessional. The circle was modest but important. Mr. Charles Havers, who had gray hair and no emotions, sat in the middle. He was the kind of man who collected secrets like other people collected stamps. Olivia Moran sat in a chair to his right, attempting to look calm and mostly succeeding. Princess Anne watched everything from the shadows at the far end of the chamber, her face showing that she had been waiting years for this moment. "Warrant Officer Trenum," she remarked without getting up, her voice full of the weight of inherited power. "Do you know why you're here?" "Yes, Your Highness." She put a big folder on the polished cedar table with the same respect that people normally show for religious books. "We've looked over your submission." Miss Moran confirmed the differences in the archives. Independent verification shows that 3 legacy classified items are missing. Anne leaned in, her fingers crossed like a judge getting ready to make a decision. "Is it true that my mother gave you verbal control over the Windsor Legacy Wing in 2019, with no witnesses or registry?" "Yes, ma'am, and she told you when that job would be over." "She said it wouldn't, at least not until time or truth made it unnecessary." The place was as quiet as a grave. Anne slowly sat back, and a look of contentment crossed her face. "Then you did the right thing." It wasn't a compliment. Princess Anne didn't use flattery to get what she wanted. It was confirmation that changed reality in a way that made it final. She went on, "If the Queen Consort accessed those items without official record or sovereign consent, then this isn't just a breach of protocol, it's a breach of sovereign trust." Havers nodded once, and the gesture had the weight of judicial precedent. Anne's eyes were locked on Elias with laser-like intensity. "You'll stay at your post, you only report to this table, and if this gets worse," her voice softened just enough to show that there was a human being underneath the royal armor, "I want you to be ready to say what others are too scared to say." Elias had spent 40 years learning how to be quiet, but if duty called for his voice, he would not let her mother down. "Got it, Your Royal Highness." The lunch was intended to be a normal part of the week, a polite way to end a week of talks with a visiting Nordic group. St. George's Hall in Windsor, with its high ceilings and centuries of grandeur, was the perfect place for the kind of ceremonial lunch that makes foreign diplomats feel important, and trade deals look like they will happen. But when Queen Camilla walked in wearing the Lockidge jewelry, everything changed. The pendant was a pear-shaped emerald set in gold lattice that hadn't seen the light of day since Edward II's reign. It caught the light like a star locked in a cage. When worn against royal blue silk, it didn't just shine, it made a statement. Everyone in that hall who knew anything about royal jewelry gasped. From his spot on the west wall between the Union flag and the Windsor family crest, Elias could see it right away. People thought he was there for a ceremony, not for security. But as soon as the emerald touched the light from the chandelier, the ceremony turned into a fight. Elias's voice pierced through the crystal and silverware music like a knife through silk. "Your Majesty," he said, "I respectfully call on Section 12 of the Royal Safeguard Act." Everyone in the hall stopped talking right away. Forks were hanging in the air halfway to lips. The Finnish diplomat really did drop his napkin. Camilla turned to him slowly and carefully, like a cat that saw something move. "Give me an explanation." Elias stayed calm, and his speech had the type of clarity that comes from being completely sure. "That pendant is listed in the Sovereign Legacy Register 041F. It hasn't been cleared for personal display yet. Taking it out of archival custody is against legacy protection orders issued by the late Queen. That huge hall was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop, or maybe a crown. Are you saying I stole something?" Camilla's voice was icy as ice but absolutely calm. "I am saying that under legacy protocol, the physical presentation of protected property without verification triggers an institutional review." The diplomatic corps gasped as if wind had blown through wheat. The king, who was sitting 2 chairs to Camilla's right, looked like he was made of stone. His quiet said a lot more than his voice could. That's when Mr. Havers stood up from his seat next to the Canadian delegation and pulled out a case coated with velvet. He walked up to the head table like a guy giving final rites. He gently set the case on the table and remarked, "This is not an accusation, it's a check." Camilla stayed calm, but her palm moved toward the pendant without her knowing it, as if she had just realized it was now proof instead than jewelry. Olivia Marin's hands shook as she held the historical ledger. When Havers opened it to page 041F, the hall grew very quiet. He read in a loud voice that echoed throughout the room. The Lockidge Pendant entered sovereign inventory in 1863 under Queen Elizabeth. It was moved to legacy-protected status in 2005 at the explicit request of Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. The item is non-transferable and non-disable until the official succession review scheduled for the year 2070. He closed the book with the skill of a surgeon. Wearing it in public while it is still in the registry is against both archival security and heritage sovereignty. Camilla's fingertips found the emerald that was around her neck. Her late Majesty promised me this pendant in private. Do you have proof of that promise? Havers inquired in a calm but brutal way, like a prosecutor who already knew the answer. No, it was verbal. That's when Princess Anne spoke up, striking through the lies like a sword. My mother never made any such promise, at least not about the Lockidge Pendant. That piece was always seen as institutional heritage, not personal inheritance. She was clear about the difference. Camilla looked at Charles for a moment, but he didn't move. His face was blank, and his hands were folded in front of him like he was praying or giving up. Olivia moved up with an old leather diary that had yellowed pages. She put it in front of the king with the respect that a holy book deserves. "Sir," she whispered softly, "we found this in the same compartment as the pendant. Inside we found this." The note came out of the journal like a ghost coming to life. When Havers opened it, Queen Elizabeth's unmistakable handwriting seemed to fill the room with her presence. "This pendant should not go to private hands while the country still remembers my name. It belongs to the legacy, not the lineage." There was complete stillness after that. The Nordic delegation, who presumably didn't understand half of what was going on, seemed to know that they were seeing something important. As a chess master would do when they saw checkmate, Camilla carefully got up, moving with purpose. She reached for the necklace with the same care that is typically used to defuse bombs, taking it off her neck and putting it on the velvet tray. "I don't disagree with the late Queen's handwriting," Camilla continued, her voice booming across the hall like a judgment. "But I do question the motives of those who read it." The Prime Minister's assistant was already taking notes. Across the room, whispers became louder, like thunder in the distance. But at the head table, time seemed to stop until King Charles offered a little nod, just enough to change the mood in the room. That one action altered everything. There was no big announcement, no gavel hitting wood, and no reading of the charges. There was just a moment when authority recognized truth, and truth commanded action. Elias walked forward with the navy bag he had brought for this very reason. Archival cloth with silk lining that keeps artifacts safe from the oils on people's hands. He didn't ask for permission or say what he was about to do. He just opened the pouch and waited. Camilla looked at him for a second too long. And at that instant, they both understood what this event actually meant. Not just the restoration of a pendant, but also the realization that some things were bigger than the people who wore crowns for a short time. She put the Lockidge pendant in the sack without saying anything, then leaned down so that only Elias could hear her last words. "You think you've protected the monarchy," she said softly, her voice heavy with the bitterness of someone who has fought this kind of war before. "But all you've done is make it weaker." Elias didn't answer, because in his experience, threats didn't sound like strength. It sounded like stillness lasted long enough for the truth to come out on its own. There was no fanfare at the start of the escort. There were no ceremonial guards or red carpets. Elias walked exactly 3 steps ahead, and Camilla followed with the dignity of someone who had lost a battle but refused to give up the war. There were 2 officials from the Royal Collection Trust on either side of them, but they were more for show than anything else. They walked through the east wing of Windsor, down halls that are generally only open to workers and important visitors from other countries who didn't want to go on the grand tour. There were no pictures of long-dead kings and queens watching them go by. There were no golden frames to catch the sun, just cold stone and the sound of footfall that seemed to clock down the seconds until everything changed. The staff at the palace observed without looking. A maid stopped sweeping. Without thinking, a young footman stepped aside. The queen consort moved toward an exit that would change her place in history, and even the paintings appeared to watch. Camilla halted at the line between her private life and the public consequences, but not in a big way. She had never been one to act out, but she was now doing so with the calmness of someone who was about to die. She didn't look back or say goodbye or do anything dramatic. She just walked through the door and into whatever happened next. The door closed behind her with the quiet finality of a page turning in history. The constitutional machinery at St. George's Hall began its cautious task of handling a crisis that might change the British monarchy forever. Elias, on the other hand, didn't take part in those talks. He had done his duty and felt good about it. That night, the Lockidge Pendant was put back in its vault and given a new name, 041, FA, compromised, recovered. The Queen's note was sealed separately and given its own security measures. As planned, the journal stayed hidden up and unread until 2070. The vault had new security features by dawn, biometric locks that needed approval from both the Royal Integrity Liaison and the senior living royal sibling, using technology to defend the past from the people who are in charge of it right now. None of it was on the evening news. The palace didn't say anything. There were no leaked pictures, no viral videos, and no frantic commentary from royal reporters. It was just one sentence in the court circular, dry as dust and twice as final. Her Majesty the Queen Consort will not be seen in public until further notice. The next morning, Elias went back to work. Same uniform, same stance, same silent look set on the horizons that had watched over kings and queens for nearly 1,000 years. But there was a cream envelope on his barracks desk with Princess Anne's unmistakable handwriting on it. There was a short note inside that expressed everything that needed to be said. My mother knew what she was doing when she gave you that job. You didn't just keep the things safe, you kept her memory safe. Thank you, Anne. Behind it was something even more valuable, a scanned copy of Queen Elizabeth's original trust directive from 2019, which had just been reclassified as a historical legacy directive and was just as important as any law in the Royal Collection Trust. Elias put the letter in the same footlocker that had been with him through every posting, ceremony, and shadow duty since the Queen gave him the brass key. It would stay there for the rest of his life as a reminder that certain jobs are bigger than the people who give them to you. Later that day, a young intern from the palace came up to him nervously near the back stairs. "Sir," the boy asked in a voice that was just above a whisper, "was it true? She really tried to steal the Queen's stuff." Elias didn't answer right away. Then, without moving from his station, he said softly, "Let's just say that not everything that shines belongs to the person who picks it up." The intern blinked, not sure how to react to that answer. But Elias was already back to the kind of calm that protects not only castles, but also the memories of the women who constructed them. Elias remained at his post, the castle quiet around him. The lessons of decades, loyalty, patience, discernment, held him steady. The brass key, the footlocker, the envelope from Princess Anne, and the scanned trust directive were more than objects. They were proof that history could be preserved even when power was tested. Outside, Windsor Castle resumed its usual rhythm. Footsteps echoed in hallways, guards patrolled, and tourists admired the centuries-old architecture, unaware of the events that had just reshaped the royal legacy. Inside, Elias allowed himself a brief exhale. The weight of responsibility was lighter now, not because the challenge was over, but because it had been met with integrity and courage. The Lockidge Pendant rested safely in its vault, the journal remained untouched, and the memory of Queen Elizabeth's trust was honored. In that quiet, Elias knew that some battles were fought not with weapons, but with discipline, wisdom, and an unwavering sense of duty. The castle slept, history remained secure, and a silent guardian kept watch, as he always had, over the treasures, secrets, and legacies that outlasted lifetimes.